don't know if I'm recording. I think I'm probably recording. Oh boy. Okay. Well, I'm gonna go with that I am. I've been having great struggles with technology today. And I'm recording this video for the second time because, well, no, more than that. because I can't get it to work. So anyway, let's hope for the best. Um, yeah, and I hope you guys are well. Yeah, yesterday I just had you read a little bit on New Zealand. And the day before that, we started jumping into chapter 13, which was all about Japan during the Edo period. So we're picking up where we left off. So, yes, last class we left off with, Monday. Um, how do you think that the lower classes, why do you think the lower classes were more likely to defy the shogun's order and keep their religious beliefs? Remember, we were talking about how the Portuguese had brought traders into, or the Portuguese traders came to Japan and they let them in, and then they brought missionaries, and then a whole bunch of people got converted, and then the shogun was like, yikes, we don't want people to be loyal to anyone but us, and they kicked them all out. And if they were Japanese and they refused to change their beliefs, then they were executed. It was an example of what we call religious persecution, where people are sort of treated badly, differently, sometimes killed for what they believe in. So, going off of that, the missionaries continued to come to Japan because, as we learned Monday, as we talked about Monday, they were really determined. They weren't just casually like, oh, maybe we want to go to Japan. They were like, no, this is our mission from God, is to come to this country and to bring Christianity. And so they didn't care that the law necessarily had changed. They just had to disguise themselves. So they disguised themselves as traders, but this caused the shogun to come up with an even more strict set of laws because they were like, if we can't limit it to the missionaries not being able to get in, we can't let anyone in. So he passed a set of laws called the exclusion laws, which was to basically completely isolate Japan. And the penalty for breaking these laws was death. So here are the exclusion laws. There's 5 of them. The first one, all Christian missionaries and foreign traders were forced to leave Japan. No one new could enter. So they essentially closed all the borders. So it's kind of like what we've been doing with COVID, is like countries have been closing borders and not letting people in. That's what happened with Japan, but it was for hundreds of years. They said no one can come in, no one can go out. Closed. Japanese were not allowed to go abroad. So they could not go visit other countries. So you can imagine that, back then there was less travel, but still some. And this idea that Japanese people could never go and, go to China and learn something new or experience something different. They were not allowed to leave Japan. Ships large enough to make long voyages could no longer be built, and existing ones were destroyed. So, because they didn't trust people, the shogunate didn't trust people to follow these laws. They said, we aren't even going to build ships big enough for people to take these trips. Because if we have the ships, someone's going to take it and do what they're not supposed to do. So we're not even going to make it possible for people to leave. Japanese who were out of country were forbidden to return. So if you were Japanese and you'd been out trading or on a ship, or you'd gotten, shipwrecked somewhere, you could never come back. Because they were worried that those ideas that they saw as being so dangerous, like Christianity, for example, would come back with those people, because that if you've traveled, you've somewhere and experienced something new, you might be bringing those ideas back to Japan, and they didn't want that because it threatened the power of the shogun to have anyone else have knowledge that they didn't know or have conflicting ideas. Because one of the reasons why Christianity was so threatening to them is because you can't really be loyal to either completely loyal to the shogun and completely loyal to a Christian God, because there's going to be things that Christianity says to do, and if that's your master greater than the shogun, then the shogun's not going to like that very much, and he loses a lot of his power. And most foreign objects were forbidden. So all foreign books containing Christian messages were banned, and scientific books were forbidden. So they were so worried about people having access to knowledge that they censored the information. They censored the books that they could have. Strict control. So, in addition to the exclusion laws, they tightened up control on people's movement within Japan. So, even people who lived in Japan had never left had new rules. So, one was people needed special documents to travel from one region to another. So, even within Japan, if you wanted to go from one area or one island to another, you needed permission and documents. Be like if you were traveling to Calgary and you needed special documents to do that. All wheeled transport was banned because getting somewhere with wheels is it's kind of like the idea of the ships, where if you have the access, you're going to do it more. So people could move more quickly and move stuff with wheels. And a curfew was put in place to keep people from moving around at night when they couldn't be watched. So what would be the benefits? So what would be the good things about living under the exclusion laws? And you might have to think hard, but there's a reason why they're there. So what would be the benefits of it? And what would be the downfalls or the challenges to living under these laws? So hopefully you were able to come up with some benefits. Living under the exclusion laws, there'd be an increased sense of safety, knowing that no one can come in that is not from there. There'd probably be a comfort in knowing that, I mean, you wouldn't know that you didn't know, but not having all these different ideas to think through. Like, we have to think about what do we believe about things, and we have all these new ideas, and they didn't really have a lot of new ideas being introduced. There was a peace of mind there. You probably thought of a whole bunch more. And downfalls, obviously, like reduced freedom, reduced rights, feeling like you're always being watched. Also, not being able to travel and see and learn the way that you would have, not having the access to new ideas that would come in with trade, and so staying like kind of technologically and intellectually backward, like not backwards, but not progressing. What might be some examples of times where governments may decide to close their borders? So we're actually kind of living in one right now. But can you think of any other times where a government might say we don't want anyone coming in or out? Okay, exceptions. So there were some exceptions to these rules. They were very strict, but the shogun allowed a few things. So they did not allow any Portuguese and no other races or like countries of people except the Dutch, Korean, and Chinese traders. The reason is the Dutch traders were allowed on a small island in the harbor of the city of Nagasaki, and the shogun considered the Dutch less threatening because they were interested in trade and not in religion. The Dutch did not care about converting the Japanese people. They were there for goods. Rules. So there were some rules for these Dutch traders that were able to stay there. One of them was that their families were not allowed to join them. So only the trader could come, and his kids, wife, whatever, could not join. The Japanese servants were forbidden to talk to them. So they were so worried that the Dutch would like corrupt the thinking of the Japanese that they were not allowed to talk to the people that worked with them. And once per year, they had to travel to Edo to pay their respects to the shogun. And it was very expensive, and they had to stay there for 3 months, which is a long time. When they were there, they would be asked lots of questions about life in other parts of the world. They were sort of bringing information to the shogun and kind of being his like eyes and ears in the rest of the Western world. So there were some people called Dutch scholars. The name is Rongaku. Is the Japanese word for what they were called. Basically, there was a few people that were kind of allowed to learn about Dutch medicine and Dutch language. So one of the things that the Japanese found, was that the Dutch actually like knew things that the Japanese didn't know about the human body and about medicine. And so the shogunate kind of allowed some to learn, some Japanese to learn the Dutch language so that they could look at these books and see, because with medicine especially, like if there's things that we could know to help people, and we don't know them, then it's kind of important to get that knowledge so that you can take care of people. So the shogun began to also get people to study astronomy and other Western knowledge. Some foreign books were allowed in Japan as long as they were not about Christianity. So it sort of lightened up over time as they realized, there's some things that these Dutch have and or know that we don't know, and they sort of gained that trust. However, most Japanese people would never be exposed to these ideas, as the shogun worried that the outside ideas would confuse the people and make them forget they owed total obedience to him. So this knowledge was restricted to a very small group of people, and and sort of the higher up people, because any new ideas are a threat to the shogun and his kind of ultimate control and authority and power. This is a video that I do want you to watch. I'm not going to play it on here because it's going to make my video longer, and then it's going to be too much space, and then I'm once again going to have to redo it, and oh my goodness. But I want you to check it out. I'll post it as part of, I'll post it in the assignment. Yeah, like the Google Classroom assignment. So what are some of the problems that come with change and progress? So the shogun was very afraid of change and progress. What are some of the problems that come with it? Oftentimes we think of change and progress as really positive things, most of us, but a lot of times there are negatives and problems that come along with progress. So as an example, I want you to think about technology. What are some of the problems that maybe new technologies have brought? And I want you to think about maybe what are some things that people have told you, like, oh, you're missing out because you're living in the age of cell phones, for example, and oh, these are all the problems that it's brought. I'm sure you've heard of those. So what do you think? What do you think might be some challenges that new exciting technology can bring? Attitudes towards change. So this is a big one, kind of comparing it to the Renaissance. So during the Renaissance, there was a positive attitude towards change. People were excited about discoveries and the idea that they could progress, make things better for people. Change was seen as such a good thing, but that's not the way it was in Japan. In Japan, change was feared because they wanted to protect what they already had, and they were too afraid of things changing, too afraid of power changing. But I want you to think about the Canadian attitude towards change. So would you say that this value is shared by Canadians today, a positive attitude towards change? Do you feel like the attitude towards change is generally positive or negative? And there can be people who have a negative attitude, but if you think it's generally positive, then go with that. If you think that there are people that are positive, but in Canada, mostly negative towards change, go with that. And then I want you to think a little bit about your attitude towards change. Do you get excited when there's like new things or the idea of progress, or does it kind of make you nervous? And do you want to protect the status quo a little bit? Sorry, I've been holding a piece of bread in my hand the whole time I've been doing this, so I'm going to eat it. I was eating bread before I started recording it. Okay. Imagine an ideal society. What words would you use to describe this society? So an ideal society, ideal means like perfect, okay? You're not perfect, but your best. So what would be the characteristics of the best society? Sometimes to think of what we think would be the best society, we kind of want to think about what are the things that maybe we don't want, and then the opposite to those. But I want you to try to come up with 3 words, okay? You can come up with more, but I want at least 3 words about an ideal society. And the top 3, not just like 3 random words. What do you think are the top 3 things in your ideal society? So maybe one of them is like freedom, or maybe freedom's not that important to you, and maybe what's really important to you is kindness. So we're talking about this idea of an ideal society. It means that we kind of build a society around the things that are important. And the reality of things is that we wish that we could have all good things, right? Like that people could be free and also have peace and all of those things. But sometimes they actually contradict each other. So you have to build around what the most important ones are. So for the Japanese, the most important things were what I'm going to read to you. And so they were able to sacrifice some other things because this was what mattered. And you'll understand that in a second. So one of them was peace. Okay. They didn't want to be in conflict with people. They wanted to have peace. So one of the ways that you can have peace among your people is by restricting conflict. In that time in the world, there was a lot of people taking over different lands, right? We've talked a lot about like what happened to the Aztecs. They let people in, and then they came and they destroyed and they took over, and it was war. And so the Japanese didn't want that. They valued peace too much to allow foreigners to come in and potentially disrupt their peace. Respect was really important, and you guys learned about that in the last chapter a little bit, where within the social roles there was an incredible amount of respect. And that sometimes we almost are like, oh my gosh, like it's too far. Like they didn't have any individualism, but they respected people above them so much. Safety, like we talked about with peace, right? They wanted to feel safe. They wanted to feel like no one could come in and like disrupt or cause problems. Enjoyment, so being able to just take it easy, enjoy life. When there's peace, when there's wealth, it's easier to enjoy like hobbies and stuff. Leisure time, that's just free time to do what they want. So that was important. Harmony, people. Harmony sort of means like people having a similar view. So if people are in harmony, it means it all kind of works together. And so them having a very homogeneous or homogenous society where people generally believed the same things, people generally thought the same things, there wasn't all these different ideas coming at them. There was a lot of harmony. Everyone having a place, so people not necessarily, it was important to them that people knew where they fit in society, that, and their feudal structure provided that, because if you were down here, even if you were a peasant, you knew your place. You didn't have to worry about that. Whereas we live in a society where people, everyone just having a place is not necessarily the most important thing. It's about how do you work for what you want and achievement and all of that and moving up. And so that's a very different value. And security, yeah, being able to know that people aren't going to come in and hurt was important. So peace was something that happened, but at a cost. So Japanese society was shaped around these values, but there was a cost to the peace and security. So these are some of the things that people sacrificed in order to have those values met from the last slide. So life was controlled by strict rules. People weren't super free. They had a curfew, even adults, right? We think about curfews as being things that kids have. You often hear kids, even like 16-year-olds, be like, I can't believe I have a curfew. In Japan, everyone had a curfew. People could not move from the social class of their birth, right? There was no mobility. We talked about that during the feudal, when we talked about the feudal system in the Middle Ages and how that kind of demotivates people. People were not encouraged to think for themselves. You were encouraged to be in harmony. We are in a society where people are very much encouraged to think for themselves. We challenge you guys to think for yourselves and have opinions, and it doesn't matter if it's the same as everyone else, and everyone can believe what they want to believe as long as it's what's right to you, and that was not the way it was. And there was little personal freedom, such as the freedom of expression. Those things just were not celebrated. It wasn't like a big celebrated thing to get up and share your opinions or express or protest. Those kinds of things were not valued. So this is where we're going to stop today, and I want to talk a little bit about the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, because you guys learned about it in grade 6. And it's a really interesting thing because I think the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms is something that really captures, in a lot of ways, the Canadian worldview towards things like freedoms and rights. I mean, obviously. So in 82, I think it's 1982, Canada put this law, which was the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, into the Constitution. So the Constitution is like the rule book of the country. It's the most important set of laws. It's what kind of dictates how everything functions. It's the most important place. So the charter is a part of that. And basically what the charter is it's a set of rules that have to do with what are people's rights and freedoms. And like people are owed that. Those rights are protected. So there are things like having the right to have your own religion, and that no one can make you change that, which obviously we saw in Japan was not a thing. They tried to make people change their religion, and they were killed if they didn't change their religion. Freedom of speech is protected in the Charter. Freedom of mobility, so being able to go anywhere in Canada that you want, is protected. Democratic rights, having the right to a trial, which was not something that always happened in Japan. You could be put to death for any of those violations. So the question I have questions. I have two questions for you to finish off today. In what ways would the exclusion laws in Japan violate the charter? So Japan's in the Edo period is obviously not under the law of the charter, but if it was, where would there be violations there? So if you're not familiar with the charter, look up Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, and you'll see, or maybe I'll put it in the Google Classroom. But you'll see some of the rights that people have. So how would Japan violate that during this time? And number two, the exclusions laws show that Japan is willing to sacrifice freedom to protect peace and security. What values does Canada sacrifice in order to protect rights and freedoms? So what I mean by this question is that Japan at this time, peace, security, harmony are more important than everything else. And so things like freedom of opinion, freedom of mobility, being able to travel, all of those things are sacrificed in order to meet these values or these goals. Okay, in Canada, we say that what's really important is people's rights. We say what's really important is their freedom. People being able to have their own opinions and diversity and all of these things we say are really important. And so what things are we maybe sacrificing when we are so focused on individual rights and freedoms? So I want you to think about that, answer those two questions. And that's where we'll stop for today. So it's great to talk to a computer and pretend it's you guys. I really hope that you're having a great day, and I will talk to you soon.